get out to California and get around all the A players that you can find. Get over yourself and get around the people who you're going to learn from and feed off of.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have a really amazing founder. We're going to be talking about building, scaling. In this case, transitioning from CEO to CTO. Also, the implications of AI in today's world and things perhaps to think differently if you were to start again with everything that is going on, raising money as well. And brace yourself for a very inspiring conversation. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Nick Schrock. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So originally born in Minnesota, and you grew up there in the suburbs in Minneapolis. So give us a walk through memory lane. How was life for you growing up?
Oh, I think I have a pretty conventional upbringing in a lot of ways. I grew up in a city called Edina, which is kind of a upper middle class suburb in Minnesota. And I had my parents. I come from a medical family. My father's a doctor, a brilliant guy, and they were very academics. My parents were very academics focused, so we always had a lot of high expectations on that front and a lot of vigorous conversations. And they were well read, so kind of had a very enriched childhood on that front. I kind of had like not a particularly remarkable high school, junior high experience. I mean, I was a bit precocious, but I'm not one of these like Teal fellows who were like, solving world peace at the age of 13 or started a business empire at 16. I had a fairly well balanced childhood. I worked hard. I did well in school, and I was very into percussion. Drumline, and then I got into marimba, which is kind of a xylophone-esque thing you play with four mallets. And
what about history? It sounds like when you were heading off to college, history was what you were thinking, but eventually, that transition to computer science, which is quite the shift.
It is quite the shift. I like thinking about systems a lot. So when I kind of read about politics and history, I come at it, and I always have from like a very young age, come at it from a systems perspective. I once wrote a biography of myself when I was in 5th grade, and it was like an exercise. You write like a future timeline of yourself, and like I was going to be president of the United States, but the way I was going to get there is I moved to Florida and I became governor. And like, this is my story. And I was like 10 years old when I wrote this, so I was kind of like thinking in terms of strategy and systems for a long time. And that's really like the way I'm in the software world. I'm very interested in the abstractions and like systems aspects of it, which kind of like mirrors the way I think about politics and organizational thought. Like, I'm not much of a hacker, actually. Like, I don't like do lots of side projects at home. Like, I kind of have a different, like, I'm far more abstract. Oh, that balance is changing with AI, because AI can capture so much incidental complexity that I'm much more liable to do like home automation, that sort of stuff now. But yeah, no, I like thinking about strategy and systems, and that's kind of the lens that I approach history and politics with.
So when you came out of college, you decided to go to Microsoft, but it was not a long stint before you decided to pack up the bags and go to Europe. So what was that experience like of working at a iconic company like Microsoft, especially being the first job, and what you got out of that, and I guess like what opened up when going to Europe?
Yeah, so I ended up going to London School of Economics. It's interesting. I have very warm feelings towards Microsoft. Actually, I was in the developer division. which produced the .NET framework in C Sharp, and like the engineers there were brilliant. I attribute a lot. I was actually talking to someone about this earlier today. I attribute a lot of my success in doing dev tools at Facebook to that experience. I kind of like worship at the feet of Anders Heilsberg, who was the designer of C Sharp and now of TypeScript. I think he's just a brilliant engineer with also a very pragmatic approach that I try to do my best to emulate. So I liked Microsoft in a lot of ways, but I'm pretty naturally, I was kind of ambitious without a plan, and I didn't really think about going what I was doing. In a lot of ways, I was kind of doing a default thing of going to a company I had an internship with and had a positive experience. And I kind of like woke up one day. I was like, listen, what happens if I absolutely like devote my life to this and absolutely like so-called crush it here for 5 years? And then like, I'm like 5 years ahead. I'm like some like mid-level manager or something. Like, good. And I was just like, I'm too young. I was 22. I had lots of varied interests. I wanted to like travel the world a bit. It was also kind of, I was 18 when 9/11 happened. And, Napoleon has this line that like, you can understand a lot about a man, about like what happened, what was going on in the world when he was 18. And so that, I thought about maybe the right path forward was kind of going into some form of government or government adjacent, or politics adjacent field. And I felt like LSE was going to be an interesting place to explore that. And I was also very interested in like living abroad, just to vary my experience. So I'm kind of, I meet a lot of young people, and it's interesting. A lot of interview rubrics, when you're doing behavioral interviews, kind of guide you to, like, what are your career goals for the next 5 years? And I always like, I didn't really have any. Like, I meaning like I didn't have an exact plan. I'm kind of a person, and maybe it's naive, but I'm a big believer in kind of exposing yourself to a lot of stuff and trying to go at opportunities, because I think there's a lot of luck in life. And I guess I came to realize that you know, the whole notion of like doing a direct pipeline from like a fancy college to a fancy internship to a fancy big company like thing, which is like very common in the Valley now, right? Like you go to some fancy private high school, then you go to Stanford, then you do the internship at Google, and then you get the full-time thing at Meta, and then you like do a startup or something. That's like the pipeline. It's like so institutionalized and so narrow in a lot of ways that, I was able to kind of go abroad. I think it might have like delayed my career a little bit, but I'm happy I did it.
Well, I mean, obviously that really opened up the opportunity of coming back and getting into the world of startups. Now, the first phase of startups for you, as they say, you either succeed or you learn, and there were a lot of lessons learned along the way before you actually went to Facebook. I guess, how was that first stint with startups? For you.
Yeah, it was. I kind of gravitated towards what some of my friends were doing, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and it's kind of ironic. I just talked a big game about getting a varied experience and all this stuff, but then I ended up going back to Ann Arbor of all places to work for uh, a healthcare startup that a couple of my friends were participating in, and the I guess I really did like, I kind of, after a year of LC, I was like, what, I think I am a software engineer. And that is what I want to do. And I was also, I like the mission of the company. It was, kind of working on healthcare data interoperability, which I think is like a very important problem. So that was pretty motivating to me. And then worked very closely with some dear friends on that. So that was a fun way to spend a couple years in my 20s. And then went to Chicago actually to start a business with with a college colleague, a brilliant guy, and he pitched me on building software for hedge funds and proprietary trading shops because he had been working at the Citadel, and we didn't have any support, we didn't get any investment, and that's I think that's like the first time in my life where I was really kind of got my blank handed to me, my ass handed to me on calls where like we came in like very naive and like we're trying to like pitch stuff to these firms, and they're just like, "Who are you people? Like, I know this your friend worked for Citadel, but like, you guys don't know what you're talking about." Um, and and then the financial crisis happened, and then it became just like a terrible idea to do what we were doing. But it ended up working out pretty well because when actually my office mate at Microsoft kind of heard that I was on the open market and recruited me to or at least put me in the queue for Facebook, which was like super transformational, got me out to the valley. Um,
So
and
how was that for you too? Because I mean, there you spent 8 years, which is a significant amount of time. I mean, seeing a company grow like that over those years, I'm sure it was quite, as you were saying, transformational. What were some of the, if you had to like name like the three biggest things that you took away from your experience from working at Facebook, what would those be?
Oh my god, it's almost hard to tease apart because it's so like it like prior to forming Dagster Labs, like Facebook is like by far like defined my professional identity. Um, and when I joined there, I was kind of like a pea in a pod. Like I just like I got along with everyone. I was kind of like aligned with the core culture. So not only was I was like early-ish, I was like engineer 180, but I was like very quickly kind of like inner circle's too strong, but like I just fit like hand in glove into the engineering culture, and I kind of had the right skill set. Like I was deeply cared about software engineering best practices, and like and the company needed that at that point. So I it was just exhilarating. One, you know, I kind of been a big fish in a small pond in a lot of my career. So I was always like, kind of top of the heap in my cohort. And then at Facebook, I learned what really good engineers, what really productive engineers look like. And I was like, oh my God, these people can just blow me out of the water. I have so much to learn, which was a really valuable and humbling experience. And then you have to figure out like what your actual contribution is. um, Facebook was an extraordinary place to work, especially for like the first 3 or 4 years I was there. And people like assume when I'm talking about that I'm talking about the financial outcomes of having an IPO, and that was great. Like like I'm not gonna like lie about that. But what I really remember much more fondly is just like, given the crew that we had, the size of the team, the quality and quantity of work was extraordinary. And I think that Facebook's engineering culture, like 2013, 2010, 2013, that range is just like it's not perfect, but like as far as whenever I talk to anyone, I kind of explain some of its core properties. Like it's just like it was like a golden age. It was like anyone who participated in it like looks back on it very fondly, and like kind of like just how quickly we moved, and like, and it wasn't just moving quickly like building like slop, right? We like externalized open source frameworks as a result of that work that are like universal standards now. So it's there's a very special culture in the internal dev tools at Facebook. So learned about that, and the talent density is very important. I think. I think the other thing I learned, and it's hard to do if you're not a super resource. If if you give ambitious engineers who have kind of like wide dynamic range of skills um, room to run with not too much and ability to like self-direct and build on their own. Not everyone can do this, but there's this subset who can. You can really get extraordinary outcomes organically. And that was, like, because like with these projects that like came that ended up like being industry defining in some ways, like wasn't a directive. It was some like individual engineer who had an idea and then was given space to like build. and then and very quickly use the technology to build our core stack. So um, that was yeah, great. I really look back on I'm very grateful to Mark and Cheryl and the whole team for building this culture. Shrep to the CTO, um, building a great culture to define a career, and and yeah, and then it was great. Like any job, it had its ups and downs, but
So there's
um,
always ups and downs.
very well run organization.
Now,
Actually,
talking about ups and downs, nothing like the ups and downs of the world of entrepreneurship. So, eventually, after 8 years, you decide to turn page and go at it again. Now with Dagster Labs. Uh, Talk to us about how did the idea of Dagster Labs, come to you? Obviously, after Facebook, you took a few months off and you were looking into things. So, how do you land into Dagster Labs?
yeah. So I knew I wasn't gonna like ride off into the sunset. I a lot of gas left in the proverbial tank. So I was looking around what to do next, and I wasn't necessarily going to start a company. Um, I actually what I started to look around in actually was healthcare again. Because one of the things I found interesting about the way that GraphQL was adopted was it wasn't just adopted early in its life cycle by kind of bleeding edge tech companies with a high risk profile. Like it was adopted by KLM, Walmart, et cetera, et cetera. So some sort of cultural shift had happened where like more traditional organizations were willing to have engineering groups who kind of could have a different risk profile and different mentality than the organization that enclosed them. And I was very interested in, given kind of the advances in dev tools and taking a fresh look at how we could, how I could participate in the healthcare sector. So, basically, I started talking to people and that were in the area, and I talked to them about their technology problems. They're like, "Oh, our big problem is data." I'm like, "Oh, like HIPAA?" They're like, "No, no, 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 no. We mean just like the basic nuts and bolts of like moving it from like this legacy system into like something else." And then I would talk to them, and like sometime at the end of conversation, one time I was like, "Wait, so you're telling me that you have this vision for transforming American healthcare?" But the thing that's preventing you from doing it is the ability to do regularized computation on a CSV file. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh my, this is ridiculous. So I kind of like throughout my career, I've always attempted to work in product. And then I've been drawn down the stack because some aspect of the technology we built on is like deeply offended me. And like I was like compelled to work on it. And so this was like the final instance of it where I was just like, okay, I'm not going to like fight my nature anymore. Like I'm like now because I have this conversation and like follow up conversations, I'm like being drawn to what I like to say is I'm drawn to developer experience dumpster fires like a moth to a flame. I like just can't help myself. And then I started looking into this and like, it was just like, it felt like the developer tools and life cycle was like going into data was like going back 10 years. I thought these were like incredibly important pieces of software that for some reason were like referred to as just like data cleaning and like glue code and like kind of like these like blue collar terms. But like these are like it's like the core business logic and value of a lot of companies, and like the ML systems that these feed into and the analytics system are basically the basis of most both human and automated decision making in our society, and it's all built on like a house of cards. So I was very compelled by that. I like working on like broad horizontal problems where can impact a lot of developers, and then I also like problems that kind of are a mix of technical and organizational design. So in when I was at Facebook, I kind of like said to myself, like, listen, if what I'm working on isn't going to change the org chart, I don't. It generally actually doesn't interest me. You know, like like, and that's not true of all engineers, right? Some engineers like the org chart stays the same and they make something like 10x faster. And that's awesome. And that's great. Like that's so valuable, right? And I'm not like denigrating, but it doesn't like excite me as much as like this technology I built allowed like these interfaces between teams to change as well. And then you can like think about like how the system works. And I think that's a very impactful thing. And data platforms are like ripe for that type of thinking, because everyone in the organization has something to say about the data platform. And there's like it's the most like heterogeneous stakeholder environment I've ever seen in terms of like you got all sorts of people building the platform under it, building the data pipelines over it, integrating tools over here. Every function tries to get value out of it. And then like a technical insight. So kind of this like mix, and then I kind of like latched onto it and started to read things and prototype it. I still think that like data, like so much of the value here is in the data pipelines, even in the maybe especially in the AI era. So I think it's just a very like boring but important problem, and boring from the outside, meaning like people don't think it's glamorous.
Now we'll talk about
But I actually,
the
yeah.
AI era, in just a bit. I want to ask you, for the people that are listening to really get it, what ended up being the business model of Dagster Labs? How do you guys make money?
So we're an open source framework. So people adopt it and use it to kind of model their data platforms and data pipelines and maybe build, kind of get basic versions of production. And then we provide a service called Dagster Plus that where we host the operationally demanding parts of the platform and then add lots of features that kind of move it from just an orchestrator. So what is Dagster, right? It's a piece of software where if you're a data scientist or a data engineer and you're building data pipelines, meaning you're moving data from like some source system to a data warehouse or a target system, you need to write code in order to do that. It needs to be tested. You want to be able to visualize it. You want to be able to observe it. So Dagster is a system to do that, and then Dagster Plus is a hosted enterprise platform that kind of the way we talk about it is that it kind of turns Dagster from just like an orchestrator to a full data ops platform that thinks about the entire life cycle of like writing data pipelines, shipping them, kind of doing cloud-based development, very advanced observability tools, very advanced analytics tools over them. And it's kind of like a place where everyone can come together and have like a system of record for the data platform that makes your data come alive. So that's what we do. So the companies like Discord run their entire data platform on Dagster. We host like the web tooling, a lot of stateful services on their behalf. They actually run their own compute in their own data center, and then they have like RBAC and authentication features and other features that are proprietary, and we charge money for that.
How was the transition for you two from CEO to CTO? That's quite the interesting transition as well.
Yeah, it was in 2022. I kind of was reaching my both. It's kind of two things. One, I was really kind of reaching my wit's end. I was a solo founder. I had made a pandemic move to Jackson Hole of all places, which sounds very fancy, but it was actually a terrible decision. And I was like incredibly isolated. Um, and it was just like I was just, I was at a breaking point. And the other thing that happened is I had hired uh, Pete Hunt, who I hired as head of engineering, kind of head of engineering plus plus. He had formerly been a CEO, had sold his company to Twitter. I've known him for like 10 years. And very quickly, like he had a new energy. He had more experience doing it than I did. And he was clearly operationally, like in most ways, like more competent, uh, like administrator. And it just like it kind of like became a very natural transition, where like he was kind of taking more responsibility for things and like, not in like a graspy way, but he would like help out with marketing and these other functions. And then he had all this energy and I was just like, why don't we just do this? And I've known him for like 10, he's the co-creator of the React framework, which is kind of, um, you know, like the JavaScript framework. And, he also was very business minded and we have aligned values on many dimensions, in and outside of work. So, and we're just aligned. So the transition was actually extremely smooth. Like he had previous contacts with a bunch of the team. Um, we were very disciplined about the role change, and it's really been a joy. And I kind of like got a co-founder after the fact, which has been like very critical for me. Like I need a sounding board. And like it was my wife for a long time, but that was kind of like unfair to her. Like she's started a company too, so it wasn't like crazy for me to do it. But like, you know, she we have to talk about other stuff.
I hear you. I hear you. And as going through, building the business and capitalizing the business too. I mean, you guys have raised about 55 million. How has it been to the journey of raising the money and going through the cycles?
Well, so the A was like kind of in summer of 2019. It was basically a seed round where, um, kind of the way it works is that the, the works is that I have a previous reputation of building and shipping a project get broadly adopted, so the investors kind of pay attention. And when I announced it, some of the messaging resonated with folks, and that kind of instigated a fundraising process, a so-called preemption. So that was kind of a more straightforward process. The B, the Series B, was a whole different story. We were just getting momentum on the commercial business. We kind of, I think we kind of made progress in the commercial business like six to 12 months too late, so we didn't have enough momentum really to have it. And then we were raising in Q1 of 23, which is post the collapse of the Fed bubble and pre the AI excitement. So it was the uh like the nadir of the low point of kind of the vibes in tech. And in fact, the Monday we did a bunch of pitches, like lots of people said no. And when we were scheduled to get our term sheet, it was on a Monday, and then that weekend was the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. So we were like, oh my! And then like the investors, for like very logical reasons, they were scrambling to help their portfolio companies. We're like, listen, we can't have this conversation today. And we're like, oh my god, it's just going to blow up our this is going to blow up our deal. So yeah, I've kind of gone through both versions of fundraising. There's the version where kind of like it kind of falls from the sky a little bit, and um, you get preempted, and like it's still stressful because like the psychology of it can be a lot. But then there's the version where like you're doing a bunch of pitches and you're getting punched in the face, and people are rejecting you, and that wasn't fun at the time. But I think it ended up being, one, I feel like it's built resilience in me to have that experience. Two, is a very like bonding moment between me and Pete, because we had to like go through this together. We had to really dial in the narrative of the company, which is like very important, actually. I think we actually ended up getting conviction about the business as a result. So I think the fundraising process like is good in some ways. Um, I think we did have an advantage insofar as like we have a rep in the valley, and therefore the investors take us more seriously. Like you hear these nightmare stories of kind of like investors being dismissive or rude to founders, which I find like quite objectionable. And like we only had a couple instances of that, but yeah, no, it's not fun to do like a whole bunch of pitches and like um
Yeah, not fun,
and
but very formative for sure. As you say, getting punched on the face. I mean, you learned quite a bit from that. I guess the now talking about people that are betting on you. Let's say the capital raise. You guys have about 80ish employees too. Everyone is betting on a vision here, right? So, Nick, if you were to go to sleep tonight and you wake up in a world where the vision of Dagster Labs is fully realized, what does that world look like?
That's a good question. It depends on what time horizon. Um, you know, in the current shape of the business, I guess like it's very colored now by the AI wave, because I think the AI wave is disrupting so many layers of the stack simultaneously that it's a huge opportunity to disrupt and have new players. So what I think about every morning is like, how do we position ourselves so that we're the preeminent kind of data platform company? And data platform, I mean a different way. Like we're not competing with like Snowflake or Databricks, like that layer of the data platform. By data platform, like how do we become like the preeminent control plane for every company's data platform in the AI era? And then fully realize I I love developer tools, and my what I would love to be able to build longer term is sort of like an apple of dev tools where you make like bets on a few different technologies. You kind of have you have taste about it and opinions. Um, like Apple doesn't do focus groups and they don't really do that much customer research. They just kind of do what they think is right. And I find that very inspiring. For the same reason I love Rick Rubin. Um, I think he's so funny. Like he has this. Like I've been working on this internal tool around improving agentic programming, and like I think it's like I'm actually super bullish on it. And someone was like, "How did you like make this so it's like good? Like people are gonna love this." I'm like, "There's this Rick Rubin line where he's like, I'm building it for me, and by building it for me, I'm doing the best thing for the audience." And that's really how I like think about dev tools. And like I'm even though like I'm working in data and stuff, I'm kind of a vibes guy. Like I believe in like passionate artists who have a vision for stuff and then leading people rather than like being led by focus groups and stuff. So that all where I love for Dagster, the company was originally called Elemental. And it just became too confusing to maintain two brands. But the reason why I called it that is that like my long-term vision is sort of like a like virtual cloud company where you really bet on these frameworks that get broadly adopted and then build like beautiful integrated experiences that feel great all the way from like you at that time typing code all the way to deploying on tools. um, and you can see like there's lots of companies I admire, like like I think like Vercel kind of feels like that. And Pete and I like have experience across a few domains of software, and we think we have like a playbook for this. So there's kind of like the like short, medium, and long term vision around that.
Nice. So now, let's say I put you into a time machine and I bring you back in time. And let's say, it's that moment where you are, let's say, like coming out of Chicago, of the startup that you were working at and thinking about launching something of your own. And let's say you're able to give that younger self one piece of advice for launching a business. What would that be and why, given everything that you know now?
Well, launching a business, it's interesting. The timing of it is interesting because I'd give different advice at different time based on what was the iteration of Nick Schrock. I guess what I would tell my Chicago self is like, listen, you think you're real hot shit. You're not. Like go to where the network is. Go to where the best people are in the world at this stuff and learn from them. You can't come up with this on your own. You're not that guy. So go like get out to California and get around all the A players that you can find in tech. Um, that's what I would have told myself. Is like respect the network. It's like everything because I was kind of like on my own, like wandering around to some degree. Um, and So yeah, that's what I would have told my 27-year-old self.
I love that. Respect
Like
the network.
get over yourself and get around the people who you're gonna learn from and feed off of.
Love it. Nick, for the people that are listening that would love to reach out and say hi, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, I think on Twitter or X, pardon me. X or LinkedIn are kind of my two networks. So schrockn is my universal handle there, SCHROCKN. And yeah, I respond to well crafted messages that are thoughtful. So feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being on the Deal Maker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Yeah. Thanks. It was a great time.